This semester, we've been going through the book of Daniel, and Daniel's had quite a life. In chapter 1, Daniel is taken from his country to serve as a potential advisor to the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel and his friends were pretty bold when they asked to exchange the meat and wine that the king was offering for vegetables, but then the Lord blessed them and they ended up getting favor in the king's eyes. Then in chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream with a statue that really freaks him out. In fact, so much so that he threatens to kill all of the wise men and upcoming wise men in his kingdom. But Daniel and his friends pray about it, and God gives Daniel an interpretation to that dream, which predicts the next 600 years of kingdoms, ending with Jesus coming to create an eternal kingdom. Then in chapter 3, when Daniel's away on a trip for royal work, his friends refuse to worship Nebuchadnezzar's new statue, and they are thrown into a fire furnace that is so hot that the guards that put them in there end up dying. They do not die, and Nebuchadnezzar praises the Lord again. And then, even though Daniel warns him, Nebuchadnezzar gets super arrogant again, and God makes him live as a wild animal for 7 years. He then is restored and praises God again. Then in chapter 5, King Nebuchadnezzar is dead, and his grandson Belshazzar is throwing a huge party in which he insults God in some horrifying ways. Immediately after doing this, a hand comes and writes stuff on the wall, and then long story short, they get Daniel to come interpret it, and he says the kingdom is going to be taken over tonight. Then chapter 6 skips ahead to the Persian king, who still loves Daniel and puts him in the top 3 position in his kingdom. But then a plot from the other royal advisors gets him thrown into a den of lions. But God saves him again, which then makes Darius worship God. So you can see a theme in all these chapters, but then in chapter 7 there is a big shift. Instead of a story of Daniel's life, we get an account of various visions. In chapter 7, Daniel gets another foretelling of the kingdoms to come, ending with the coming of Christ 600 years later to create an eternal kingdom. In chapter 8, the angel Gabriel gives a layout of the next 400 years of kingdoms, rulers, and their battle movements. It is unbelievably specific. Then in chapter 9, Gabriel shows up again years later and gives Daniel a bunch of specifics on what things are going to happen during the time of Jesus and things that are going to happen to Jesus. And then we get to chapters 10, 11, and 12, which are all combined as one of Daniel's experiences. 2 weeks ago, my wife explained that Daniel is visited by an angel whose eyes were like fire, skin like bronze,
and had the voice that sounded like a multitude of people.
Oh, and he also mentioned that he was trying to get there earlier, but he was fighting demons for 3 weeks and needed the archangel Michael to step in. You know, everyday angel stuff. Then last week, Wes covered a long conflict between 2 kingdoms, ending with the ultimate message that no one has power to avoid their end. Regardless of what we do, the end will still come at the appointed time. And the only good way to interact with this inevitable end is to be purified and refined. Which brings us to Daniel chapter 12. A few weeks ago, I told you a story of when we were worried about our youngest child, that she might have disabilities, and we were praying day in and day out that she might be healed. And then after weeks of praying, the Lord simply answered, "Okay, you've done enough praying." And I was like, okay, like, does that mean she's healed? And he's like, "You've done enough." In Daniel 12, God communicates in a similar feeling. It starts out with the first mention in the Hebrew Bible of a heaven and a hell. The angel says, "But at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone whose name was found written in the book. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt." And that's really specific, but then it gets a little bit more confusing. He says, "And those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky above, and those who turn many to righteousness like stars forever and ever." And then it says, "Many shall run to and fro, and their knowledge shall increase." And then another angel gets involved and asks the guy in linen, "How long shall it be till the end of these wonders?" And the guy answers, "A time, times, and half a time." And when I first read that, I thought, wow, this is like totally over my head, but apparently it's over Daniel's head too. He says, "I heard, but I did not understand." And then I said, "Oh Lord, what shall be the outcome of all these things?" I mean, these guys just revealed the idea of heaven and hell for the first time in Hebrew history. Like, this is the first time that they've given us any information about heaven and hell. And so Daniel's like, okay, it's going over my head. And so he says, "Okay, my Lord, what's the outcome here?" And the guy responds,
"Go your way, Daniel, for the words are shut up and sealed until the end of time."
I mean, I guess that's a polite way of saying it's none of your business, or that's top secret angel information. And then the angel goes on to say a few more things about the abomination that makes desolate, and it's going to be 1290 days, and then it'll be better in 1300 days. And I could get into the theories on what those different days are, but when I read this passage, it dawns on me that Daniel doesn't understand what's going on. Even angels are asking other angels on what's going on. So instead of us trying to figure out what all the numbers mean and what those things are, I think the better moral that we can get from this is that there are a lot of things that we won't know, that we aren't going to know, that God has top secret information that he isn't going to reveal to us. As I think back on when my daughter, the Lord did reveal to me that she had some kind of disability, and we were praying for her and asking her to be healed. And when the time finally came that he was like, good job, you did it, he didn't fill me in. He just told me that it was good. And I go back to other times in my life, like when I wanted to know what my career was going to be, and the Lord was not giving me an answer. And I ended up getting accepted to Texas A&M as a chemical engineer, and I thought, okay, well, chemical engineer is a high-paying job. That's where I should go. And then it wasn't until my freshman year that he's like, actually, Kyle, I want you to be in ministry. And I'm like, Lord, why did you have me at A&M? I could have been going to a pre-seminary. I could have been doing all of these different things. And now it's obvious. He wanted me to get involved with the Taproot Church of College Station. And it changed my life, and it changed my understanding of ministry. Before my experience with Taproot at Texas A&M, I wanted to go to seminary so I could get a job at the biggest church available to me, so I could be the biggest super pastor out there. I would have never said that, but the idea is bigger is better, more influence, become a great preacher. But the Lord had a different plan. He wanted me to be at A&M so that I could experience home groups and the life change that happens through one-on-one discipleship and living in community. The humility that brings, not the pedestal that a pastor at a big church brings, but the humility, the way that Jesus set it up with his disciples, the way that it was modeled in Acts. That type of true church is what he wanted for me, and it changed my life. And you might be thinking, well, couldn't the Lord have revealed that your senior year and said, hey, I want you to go to A&M? And the answer is maybe. But a quote that I've heard that was really impactful is he said, what if is a dangerous game. Deciding and even thinking about what God could have done is a dangerous game, because you don't know, because you are not omniscient. God worked it out in an amazing way. And even though I wanted more information at that time, it worked out perfectly for my story. He had a plan. As we look at Daniel 12, he is uncovering to many of us the most serious thing, heaven and hell. Some of you might have only accepted Jesus because of your fear of having eternal punishment or your desire to have eternal connection with God. So to you, it may be the most important thing in the Bible, and God's like, nah, mind your own business. So what I want us to leave with as we wrap up Daniel for this semester and go into the summer is this idea. The only knowledge that God gives us that truly brings security to us is knowledge of who God is. Even if he tells us his plans for the future, our minds are too small to truly understand what is going to happen. Just like when they promised the Messiah was coming, Daniel said it was going to happen, and a lot of the religious leaders missed it. They had all these prophecies, and Daniel predicted what Jesus was going to do, and they still missed it. Even if God told us his plans, we would probably miss it. But when we seek knowledge of who God is, and we trust in who God is, that brings true security. And when we look at Daniel's life in those first 6 chapters, as he is interacting with being uprooted from his homeland and serving tons and tons of different kings of different nations as those nations are conquering each other, and the whole time he stays fast to, I know who God is. God is sovereign and God is good. God is in charge and God can control everything, and God is good. And he's going to look out for me. And in the words of his friends, and even if he doesn't, I will still serve God. It was Daniel and his friends' security in who God was that gave him so much security in life and ultimately so much success. So as we leave this semester and we go into the summer, let us stay focused on who God is and what his character is so that we can gain our securities in that.
Action.